Welcome back. Tonight, we're taking a quiet walk through the misty streets of Victorian London, but not as a traveler and not as a dreamer. Tonight, you will walk the city as a night watchman, an overlooked figure who once kept the sleeping world safe, hour by hour, step by step. The year is 1850. The gas lamps are lit. The air is thick with coal smoke and damp silence. And somewhere between the darkened alleys and soot-streaked rooftops, a man in a heavy cloak moves quietly through the fog, his lantern swinging, his boots scuffing on stone. Through his eyes, we'll explore a city asleep. We'll hear the echo of his calls down empty lanes. We'll peer into shuttered windows and listen to the strange sounds of the night. Not all is peaceful, but much is still. And if you listen closely, the city will begin to speak. So find a warm, quiet place. Let the noise of the day fade. Close your eyes if you like, and breathe slowly. And before we begin, leave a comment below sharing where you're listening from, and what time it is, where you are. It's always comforting to know we're not alone in the night. Now, take one last deep breath, and let's begin the long, foggy shift of the night watchman. London, 1850. The city does not sleep all at once. It sighs first, as if reluctantly releasing the breath it's held all day. The carriages quiet, one by one. The shop doors close, shutters creak down, and footsteps that once echoed urgently now soften and vanish into the fog. The bustle fades not like a candle extinguished, but like embers cooling in the grate, slowly, quietly, inevitably. Fog clings to the streets like wet cloth, draped heavy across rooftops and alleyways. It wraps around lampposts and iron gates, spilling into basements and rising up to chimney pots. It is not the delicate mist of spring or the light veil of morning dew. This is a thick, industrial, fog-greasy, yellow-gray, and smelling faintly of coal smoke and damp stone. It dulls every edge and hushes every sound. What once was sharp becomes soft. What once was loud becomes little more than a whisper. The gas lamps stand guard at the corners, glowing faintly in halos that barely reach the ground. Their flames flicker as if startled by their own solitude. Each pool of light reveals only a few feet before giving way to the heavy dark again. The spaces between these lights are endless, unknown. In those shadows, doorways vanish. Alley mouths become open wounds. Streets you thought you knew twist and vanish into the night. A single footstep, then another. The city listens. Even the sound of leather boots meeting cobblestone seems out of place, too distinct, too alive. It echoes and then disappears, as if swallowed by something vast and breathing. The fog does not merely hang in the air, it moves, rolling low across the ground, brushing the tops of boots, licking at windowsills, weaving in and out of iron fences like a curious cat. From above, the rooftops resemble a forest in winter. Bare chimneys jut out like branches stripped of leaves. Some are squat and wide, others tall and narrow, each exhaling a thin curl of smoke that mixes with the fog and vanishes into the night. The houses huddle together as if for warmth, their outlines softened by soot and shadow. Tiles gleam faintly with moisture, and every gutter holds a quiet trickle of melt or rain or forgotten runoff. To look across these rooftops is to see a city blurred by memory. Inside the homes, light flickers behind heavy curtains. A last candle in a nursery window, the warm glow of a dying fire in the parlor. A silhouette moves once, then disappears behind lace or muslin. No one lingers at windows tonight. The fog draws too close. It presses its forehead to the glass and peers in. It waits. The Thames moves, as it always does, beneath arches and bridges and forgotten wharves. But even the river has slowed its voice. Tonight it murmurs rather than rushes, a slow current of oil-slick black that reflects almost nothing. Barges rock gently against their moorings, and the occasional ripple laps against stone steps with the softness of a sigh. Somewhere, a chain creaks as it tightens. Somewhere, a gull shrieks once, then falls silent. Beneath the bridges, shadow reigns. The gas lamps do not reach there. Only the memory of fire glows faint on the undersides of arches. The air tastes different, so close to the water damp, metallic, and filled with secrets. The river has seen everything, and yet it speaks only in riddles. Somewhere, in one of the city's many narrow lanes, a watchman begins his shift. He lights his lantern with a practiced hand, shielding the flame from the wind with his body. It flares once, then settles into a steady glow. He fastens it to the iron loop of his staff and steps forward into the dark. His coat sways gently as he walks. His breath rises in small puffs, visible for a moment, then gone. He knows this route well, its sounds, its silences, its tricks. But still, the fog makes every turn feel unfamiliar. Familiar buildings loom strangely large. Known doorways look foreign in the gloom. Even the cobblestones seem to shift underfoot, slick with damp and scattered with bits of ash and soot. He passes a bakery with shuttered windows. The scent of flour and coal mingles with the fog. The ovens are cold for now, but will spark again before dawn. Bakers sleep in their aprons, knowing the hour is short. Farther along, he hears the soft rustle of rats in the gutter. A cart creaks somewhere in the distance, and high above, on some invisible roof, a lone chimney exhales smoke as if the house itself were breathing in its sleep. This is a city holding its breath. Not dead, not even fully at rest, just paused. The fog is the lullaby, and the lamps are the nightlights. All across London, from the grandest square to the narrowest alley, the night lays a gentle hand. But not every home is still. In a small flat above a tailor shop, a woman rocks her sick child, whispering songs into the damp air. In a mews behind a grand estate, a stable boy curls beside a warm flank of a horse, shivering slightly under a woolen coat too large for him. In a narrow garret, a writer scratches his quill against paper, trying to catch some dream of a poem before the morning steals it away. And beneath all of them, the city's bones, cellars, tunnels, sewers, cold stone and slow drip, the deep pulse of London itself. The fog seeps there too, curling downward like smoke, seeking the floor. Even in the undercity, the night has its way. No clock ticks loud enough to own this hour. Time moves differently here. Minutes stretch like roads, winding and uncertain. The city exists moment to moment, held in the silence between gas lamp flickers. The watchman continues. Past a churchyard gate, where statues stand wrapped in ivy and shadow. Past the iron railings of a school, its windows blind in the fog. Past rows of houses all sleeping behind heavy drapes and bolted doors. At each corner, he pauses, listens, moves on. Somewhere in the fog, a bell chimes soft, distant, a note floating without direction. It might be midnight. It might be 3. Time no longer matters. Only the city remains, and the fog, and the quiet steps of the man who walks the night alone. And above it all, the sky is invisible. There are no stars tonight, no moon. Only the endless gray above, lit faintly from below by the city's own breath. Smoke rises without purpose, mingling with the clouds. The heavens have no answer, only more silence. Some say fog, like this is where dreams come from. That in the blurred edges and softened corners of the night, the mind finds space to wander. That footsteps in this kind of dark do not lead outward, but inward toward memory, toward questions, toward sleep. Perhaps that is true. Perhaps this fog does not just blanket London. It carries her secrets, her regrets, her memories of days gone by, of carriages that no longer run, of markets long closed, of voices that once called out and now are silent. But for now, the fog keeps its secrets, and the city sleeps on. He was not a hero in the grand sense, not a soldier in battle, not a man of wealth or power. But the night watchman was something else, a quiet sentinel, present when the world closed its eyes. His lantern burned where others' lights had gone out, and his footsteps were often the only ones heard after midnight. He wore a cloak to shield him from the chill, a staff to remind troublemakers of order, and sometimes a bell to mark the hours. But it wasn't these tools that made him a watchman. It was his presence, constant, unseen, essential. Most were aging laborers or former soldiers, men whose lives had been roughened by time. They found work in watching, pacing, enduring the silence that others feared. Though often overlooked, they were the rhythm of the night, the pulse of a city in slumber. The watchman's post was not one of glamour or esteem. It was not well paid, nor did it invite much respect. But it offered something many men needed: consistency. In a world where work could vanish overnight, where illness or injury could end a career, a night watch offered quiet, steady hours and a modest coin. For older men whose strength was no longer what it once was, or for ex-soldiers who struggled to find their place in peacetime, it was a way to serve again. Their shifts began when the world dimmed, when the shopkeepers bolted their doors, when the market stalls emptied, when even the taverns began to hush. That was when the night truly began, and with it, the watchman's duty. He would make his rounds slowly, sometimes alone, sometimes partnered with another, depending on the size of the district. Step by step, he would walk the same streets dozens of times before the sun rose again. There were many names for him. Some called him the Beadle, others simply the Watch. Children whispered about him, half in fear, half in awe. He was a figure made larger by the night. To some, a protector. To others, a reminder that the streets did not belong to them after dark. His tools were few, but each had meaning. The lantern was his guide, and his signal a small sphere of warmth in an otherwise cold world. Some were oil, others candlelit, and all glowed with a faint golden hue that bent in strange ways through the fog. It was a moving star on earth, trailing slowly down the alleys and past the railings, across bridges and down into narrow courts. The staff he carried was often wooden, thick and solid, occasionally tipped with iron. It was not a weapon in the usual sense, but it had weight and purpose. With it, he could knock on doors if need be, fend off stray dogs or drunken men, or simply use it as a companion to his footsteps. Tap, 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 like a metronome counting the hours of the city's rest. And then there was the bell. Not every watchman used one, but those who did rang it softly as they walked, announcing the hour with a chant that became part of the city's background music. 2 o'clock, and all is well, he might say. Or 3 o'clock, a cloudy morning. These cries weren't meant for everyone. They were for the baker already kneading dough, for the constable awake at his desk, for the sleepless widow watching the fog roll past her window. The cry of the watchman was a comfort, not odd, not urgent, but steady and sure. But who were these men, really? Some were war veterans, men who had marched in regiments and fought battles on distant fields, now reduced to pacing quiet streets, trading rifles for lanterns. Others had once been dock workers, smiths, or even constables themselves. The work of a night watchman required patience more than strength. And in a city like London, patience was a rare and valuable trait. Their faces told their stories, etched by weather and time. Their eyes had seen more than they let on. They knew which houses were empty despite lit windows. They knew which shopkeepers left their doors unbolted. They knew which footsteps meant trouble, and which simply belonged to a man heading home late. The night revealed many things, and the watchman saw them all. He was not always welcomed. Some thought him nosy, others thought him useless. And indeed, in time, the institution of the night watchman would give way to more formal police forces with uniforms, training, and authority. But in this moment, In the middle of the 19th century, he was still part of the city's fabric, still woven into its nightly rhythm. He had his route, and it was sacred. He knew the cracks in the pavement, the lean of the lampposts, the houses where the curtains never moved. He paused when he felt the need, adjusted his scarf against the damp, and moved on. His walk was not hurried. There was no need. The night was long, and it would stretch as far as he could walk. Occasionally, he encountered others. A nurse returning from a late birth, a groom hurrying to the stables, a drunken clerk singing to himself as he stumbled down a side street. In these moments, the watchman would offer a nod, a word, or sometimes silence. His presence was enough. It reminded the wanderers that someone was watching, that someone cared enough to be there. Sometimes he intervened. A fight behind a tavern, a broken window, a man collapsed in the road. These were not common, but they happened, and when they did, the watchman responded not with fear, but with familiarity. He had seen worse. He had done more. And while he lacked the authority of a magistrate, he held the power of steadiness, the power of simply being present when others were not. He was not untouched by danger. Though his job was largely peaceful, the night carried risks. Thieves lurked in the fog. Gangs moved silently between warehouses. Not every watchman returned from his shift unscathed, but these men did not seek heroism. They accepted the risk as part of the job. They wore it like the cloak on their backs, heavy, but necessary. And always they walked. They walked through the changing seasons, from winter frost that turned the streets to glass, to summer nights heavy with smoke and humidity. They walked in silence and in wind, in moonlight and in pitch darkness. Some found comfort in the repetition. Others drifted into thoughts of other lives, other times, as their boots traced the same path night after night. To the city, he was background, an echo, a shadow. But to those who listened, really listened, he was something more. He was the heartbeat of the sleeping streets, a gentle, persistent reminder that not all was forgotten in the night. And when dawn came slow, creeping, pale, he would return his lantern to its hook, hang up his coat, and step into the silence he had guarded. Another shift ended. Another night survived. Few remembered his name. Fewer still thanked him. But the streets were quieter because he had walked them. The doors stayed shut. The fog stayed watched. And London, vast and tangled as it was, could rest just a little easier, because the night watchman was there. He dressed not for elegance, but for endurance. The heavy cloak that hung from his shoulders was the first line of defense against the cold. Thick wool, dyed a muted gray or brown, it wrapped around him like a second skin, weighed with damp fog and the long memory of rain. It whispered as he walked, dragging slightly behind him, brushing against cobblestones. It held the scent of the streets, smoke, earth, and time. Beneath it, he wore layers. A coarse shirt, sometimes linen, often patched and mended. Over that, a vest, occasionally leather, more often wool again. Anything that could trap warmth and hold it close to the chest. These garments were chosen not for show, but for survival. The night in London was not a kind thing. It crept in through seams and buttonholes. It needed to be kept out. His stovepipe hat stood tall and slightly dented from use. Made of thick felt or pressed beaver, its form was sturdy. Rain slid from its wide brim in rivulets, and though it did little to warm the man beneath, it added a presence. In the dark, where outlines became truths, the hat made him seem taller, larger, more sure of himself. It marked him, not as someone of power, perhaps, but as someone with a role to play, as someone who belonged. But it was the lantern that told the story. A rounded cage of iron and glass, no larger than a man's head, it swung from his hand like a slow, breathing star. The glass was thick, sometimes cracked, always tinted yellow from smoke and time. Inside, a flame flickered oil-fed, or fueled by tallow. It danced gently with each step, its light pulsing on the wet stones below. The lantern did not blaze. It glowed. It did not banish the dark, but parted it just enough to see where the next step must go. Its light stretched only a few feet in any direction, but in the thick London fog, that was all the world. It painted walls with flickering shapes, turned the watchman's own shadow into a looming giant beside him. Through this small circle of light, he saw doorsteps and railings, fog-wet paving stones, rats darting through alley gaps, and sometimes, just sometimes, the gleam of another pair of eyes watching from the dark. He never walked without it. The lantern was not only light, it was a message. To those who might cause harm, it said, "Someone is here." To those lost in the night, it whispered, "This way." And to the watchman himself, it was companionship, something to focus on, something steady to hold while the fog swallowed the rest of the world. Attached to his belt, always within reach, was the cudgel, a simple weapon, no longer than the length of his forearm, made from dense, polished wood. Oak, if he was lucky, sometimes iron-tipped, wrapped in warm leather to improve grip. It rested heavy in his palm when drawn, and heavier still in his conscience when used. It was not meant for killing. It was meant for presence, for protection, against drunkards and thieves, against the occasional angry dog, or a door that would not open with words alone. A single knock with the cudgel against a tavern shutter could wake even the hardest sleeper. A single tap against a boot heel could remind a man to move along. But it wasn't just what he carried, it was how he carried it. Everything about the watchman's appearance had a purpose. His gloves fingerless, often wool-allowed grip, while still offering warmth. His boots, thick-soled and made of leather, were waterproof with lard or wax, and lined with old cloth. The soles clicked softly on dry stones, but sloshed and squelched in gutters. Yet they held firm. His pockets were deep, lined with string, tinder, flint, and sometimes a scrap of dried meat or a piece of chalk. Chalk for marking door symbols, only he understood. Signs of danger, of safety, of someone in need of help. These chalk marks disappeared with the rain, but long enough to pass a message to another watchman or constable before dawn. Around his waist, beneath the cloak, sometimes he wore a belt with a pouch of coins tokens collected from shopkeepers or neighbors who tipped him for checking on their property. Not bribes, gratitude. And in his inner breast pocket, tucked carefully, might be a note, a list, an address he was to keep an eye on, a name, a reminder. Some nights he added extras. A muffler tied around his face if the soot was thick, a flask of something warm, hidden deep in his coat, though frowned upon, an old whistle from years ago to call for help if the night turned cruel. But nothing was carried without thought. Everything he wore or held was chosen for the same reason: to make it through the night. The streets of London in 1850 were not lit by mercy. They were uneven, unpredictable. The fog could grow so thick that the edge of the curb vanished. A step in the wrong direction could land a man in a trench, a hole, a stream, or worse. To carry tools was to carry intention, and to carry intention was to be something more than a shape in the dark. Some watchmen carried a bell, slung from a leather cord or held by a short handle. When rung, it gave a gentle but penetrating chime. It cut through the night like a distant memory of church bells. When paired with the call of the hour, 3 o'clock and all is well, it became ritual. Not every watchman used it. Some preferred silence. But for those who did, the bell was another voice, another layer of presence. It announced time's passing and steadied the nerves of those who heard it from behind thick curtains and frost-glazed windows. And there was something ceremonial in it all. To dress for the watch was not unlike putting on armor. The layers, the weight, the tools each one, a preparation, a promise. The fog outside was indifferent. The night was long. And the dangers, though quiet, were very real. The man who stepped into the streets with these items was not just surviving, he was stepping into a role. He was becoming something the city needed, even if it rarely acknowledged it. People might forget his face. They might not know his name, but they knew the shape of him in the mist, the glow of his lantern on the wall, the low creak of his boots, the soft knock of cudgel on wood, the call of the hour, the sound of presence. In this quiet uniform, he became part of the city itself, as familiar as the smell of coal smoke, as constant as the rise and fall of gaslight. He belonged to the streets, not as a master, not even as a servant, but as a witness. A reminder that even in the darkest hours, someone was there. Someone walked. Someone watched. And when the shift ended, when the fog began to thin and the sky softened from black to blue, he would return to his small quarters, hang the cloak, unfasten the lantern, place the cudgel back on the hook. Each item would be cleaned with care. Each one returned to its proper place, ready for the next night, because there would always be another night. The tools of the watchman did not shine. They were not polished or paraded. They were quiet, worn, patient, just like the man who carried them. And together, they kept the dark at bay. The watchman's steps were never aimless. Each night, from the moment he left his small quarters to the last echoing footfall before dawn, he followed a path etched into his memory, an ancient thread weaving through the maze of London's dark streets. This path was more than mere geography. It was a rhythm, a pattern of light and sound and presence that bound him to the city, and the city to him. He walked the rounds with deliberate pace, steady and unhurried. There was a certainty to his movement, as if the stones themselves remembered his passage. Each street, each alley, each courtyard held a role in this nocturnal dance. His boots clicked on cobblestones, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp and sudden against uneven ground. The lantern in his hand swung gently, casting a circle of wavering light that stretched just far enough to reveal the next step, and the next, and the next. The watchman's rounds were a series of small actions that, together, created a powerful ritual. His purpose was clear: to guard the sleeping city, to witness its silence, to proclaim time's passage, and to send messages to those hidden in the dark. His first task, once he stepped outside, was always to check the locks. Doors, shutters, gates. They were the barriers between safety and chaos. Each one had to be tested, each one observed. The watchman knelt or leaned close, feeling the cool iron of a latch, the strength of a bolt, the tightness of a hinge. Sometimes he pressed a finger against wood, swollen with damp, listening for sounds behind it, the breathing of a house, the creak of a sleeper turning in bed, or nothing at all. If a lock was loose or a door ajar, it became a point of concern. He might mark it carefully with a chalk symbol, an X, a slash, a circle, small signs that only other watchmen or constables could read. These silent codes warned of weakness or danger. A door left unlocked might mean a careless occupant, a potential thief, or worse. After the locks came the call of the hour. The city, despite its size and noise, was never truly asleep. The watchman's voice cut through the fog like a solemn bell. It was both a declaration and a comfort. "Past 1 o'clock, and all is well," he intoned. His voice was low and steady, rolling over the rooftops and down the alleyways. It was a sound familiar to all servants tending their masters' homes, innkeepers checking their fires, bakers stirring early dough. The call was a reminder that time moved on, that the night was being watched, that the city was not abandoned to darkness. At times, the watchman's calls were more than mere clock readings. When the fog thickened, swallowing light and sound alike, he added a phrase that connected his voice to the shifting weather. "Past 3 o'clock, and a foggy morning." The words had a rhythm and a weight. They anchored the night in reality. They told anyone listening what to expect, whether to prepare for damp streets and slippery stones, or for a clear sky that promised a dry dawn. Sometimes, when rain threatened, he would call, "Past 10 o'clock, and the clouds are heavy." Or on rare cold nights when frost might bite the morning, "Past 4, and the air is sharp." These were more than weather reports. They were fragments of communal knowledge passed from one watchman to another, from night to night, season to season. The city listened through these voices, trusting them to bridge the silence. Between calls, the watchman moved with purpose. His path was mapped to pass every few streets, every row of houses. He might pause briefly at a tavern door, knocking once with his cudgel, a sharp, hollow sound meant to rouse the owner or ensure no one was hiding inside. Sometimes a gruff voice would answer back, or the clatter of pots and pans signaled a late drinker. Other times, the door remained silent, its shadowed frame a void in the night. The watchman's presence was a deterrent, a warning to anyone who considered mischief or worse. He was not a judge or a soldier, but a living sign that eyes were watching, that the city was not defenseless. The knock of the cudgel on a shutter or door was enough to send the drunks stumbling away, the thieves slipping back into their shadows. Along the way, he would sometimes mark the weather himself. With a piece of chalk or a small carved wooden token, he left signs on walls or gateposts, a line to indicate rain, a circle to mean clear skies, a zigzag for wind. These signs were tiny messages to other watchmen who would take the same route later in the night or early morning. They created a silent conversation beneath the city's skin, a hidden network that helped keep order. His rounds also took him past the great landmarks of the city, the churchyards where the dead rested, the market squares long silent now, the taverns and the inns breathing their last warm embers. At these points, he sometimes stopped longer, listening. The night was filled with sounds that told stories, the drip of water from gutters, the rustle of rats in refuse piles, the distant toll of a bell marking an hour or a death. The watchman's eyes and ears were tuned to catch anything out of place. When the wind shifted or a door creaked in the breeze, he was ready. A cudgel rested in his hand, heavy but familiar. Its wood had been worn smooth by years of use. He carried it not as a weapon to harm, but as a symbol of authority. When the call of the hour was done, he might tap his cudgel lightly on a post, as if to say, "I am here. The city is alive." At times, the watchman spoke to himself in low murmurs, old phrases handed down from others who had walked before him. "All's well," he might say after checking a door, "safe and sound." Or, "No shadows here." These words kept his mind sharp, breaking the silence and reminding him of his role. The ritual of the rounds was not just about guarding property or calling the hours. It was about being part of a tradition that stretched back decades. Each step was a connection to the past, to watchmen who had patrolled the same streets in centuries gone by. He carried their legacy, and he would pass it on. Sometimes, on the quietest nights, the watchman's voice was the only sound moving through the fog. His calls echoed faintly between the buildings, folded into the mist like a secret melody. Past 5 o'clock, and the fog lies low. Past 6, and the city sleeps. His words shaped the night itself. They were a beacon for those who needed to know, whether a mother waking to check on a sleeping child, or a constable patrolling further along the street. The ritual gave order to the chaos of darkness, a map for the lost, and a shield for the vulnerable. The watchman's rounds might last hours, but time was measured not in minutes, but in tasks completed. Every door checked, every call made, every mark left was a step closer to dawn. And though the city might never thank him, his work was its quiet heartbeat. In the deepest hours, when fog thickened into a living thing and shadows lengthened beyond reason, the ritual was the watchman's anchor. It reminded him why he walked, why he stayed awake when others dreamed, why he carried the weight of the city's night on his shoulders. And so he walked, past street after street, door after door, hour after hour, until the first faint light touched the sky and the fog began to lift. Until his rounds were done and the city could rest again, knowing that, somewhere in the dark, a watchman had been there. There was no fog like London's fog. It was not merely a mist, a breath of moisture in the air. It was a living, breathing presence, a thick cloak that descended from the heavens and seeped into every corner of the city. It crawled through alleyways and wrapped itself around chimneys. It slithered down narrow lanes and spilled into the broad streets, swallowing lampposts and lanterns alike. It was the fog that hid all. The fog was born, not just of nature but of industry. The great factories and coal fires that fed the city's insatiable hunger for progress exhaled clouds of smoke and soot. These mingled with the cool, damp air from the Thames, creating a murky soup of black and white, of coal dust and water vapor that settled heavy and thick over London. It was the fog of soot and smoke, of smoke and steam gray and choking and endlessly deep. For the Watchman, the fog was both a veil and a barrier. It obscured everything, reduced the city to shapes and shadows that seemed to float just beyond reach. The familiar streets became strange and unfamiliar, blurred by the swirling whiteness. Buildings lost their sharp edges, becoming soft forms that melted into one another. Street corners vanished before his eyes. Even the steady glow of his lantern flickered uncertainly, swallowed by the damp haze. To walk in the London fog was to walk through a ghost world. Sound was swallowed first. The click of boots on cobblestones, the call of the hour, the knocking of the cudgel, all became muted, softened, as if the fog absorbed them like a sponge. Conversations drifted faintly, voices stretched and distorted by distance and damp. Sometimes a dog barked somewhere far away, its sound muffled into a lonely echo that never quite reached the ears. Sight was betrayed next. The watchman could see only a few feet ahead, his lantern's circle of light a fragile bubble in the thick whiteness. Beyond that, shapes merged into the fog's endless curtain. A passing figure became no more than a blur, a suggestion of movement. A doorway was a shadow among shadows. The watchman's own shadow stretched ghost-like beside him, wavering and indistinct, cast by a light that barely pierced the mist. The fog was deceptive. It played tricks on the senses, making familiar places feel alien. A lamppost that stood just yards away disappeared suddenly, swallowed whole. A wall seemed to reach out of the haze like a phantom hand. The watchman moved cautiously, every step measured, because beneath the fog lay hidden dangers, uneven stones, open drains, slick patches where water pooled unseen. A single misstep could send him sprawling, his lantern extinguished and him lost in the whiteness. Breathing was heavy in the fog. The air was thick and damp, cold against skin, filling lungs with a heavy weight. Each inhale tasted faintly of coal dust and decay. Sometimes the watchman felt as if the fog itself were pressing in on him, an invisible force that slowed his movements and clouded his mind. His cloak, already heavy from evening damp, grew wetter, clinging to his frame. His gloves and boots gathered moisture that seeped into every stitch and seam. The fog transformed the night into a dreamscape. Familiar sounds were altered, new ones born. The drip of water from eaves became a soft, constant murmur, like the city itself breathing. Rats scampered noiselessly through heaps of refuse, their tiny feet muffled on the sodden ground. Doors creaked and groaned as they shifted with the chill, their noise echoing strangely, distant and distorted. Sometimes the fog carried with it the scent of smoke and coal, but other times a faint sweetness lingered, perhaps from distant flowers in a garden or the faintest trace of wood smoke from a hearth. These scents were fleeting and mixed quickly with the acrid tang of industry and the ever-present damp. The watchman learned to trust his other senses. His ears became sharper, his fingers more sensitive to texture. The touch of cold stone under a hand, the scrape of iron on wood, the faint vibration of footsteps nearby, all became clues to the world the fog concealed. His eyes, though struggling, searched for shapes that flickered on the edge of his lantern's glow. Sometimes the fog played with light, catching the lantern's flicker and scattering it in 100 directions. The glow seemed to swell and contract, a breathing orb surrounded by white. At times, a distant gaslight would glow faintly through the haze, a halo of yellow, wavering and uncertain. The fog blurred the edges of these lights, making them seem alive, as if the city itself were dotted with eyes watching through the mist. Despite its thickness, the fog was never still. It moved with the slightest breath of wind, shifting and swirling in slow eddies. The watchman saw patterns in its movement vortexes that spun around corners, sheets of mist that rolled down streets like a slow tide. The fog seemed almost sentient, as if it had its own will, hiding and revealing, whispering secrets in the silence. In the fog, time felt suspended. Minutes stretched and shrank, the night stretching endlessly before the watchman's eyes. The ritual of the rounds became a meditation, a trance. Each step through the whiteness was both a challenge and a comfort. The watchman was alone, but never lonely. The fog enveloped him like a shroud, but also shielded him from the harsher realities of the dark city. The fog hid many things. Crime, poverty, desperation, all these thrived in shadow and mist. But it also hid the watchman's own fears. In the fog, he could be anonymous, a wandering shape in the white silence. His fears were swallowed, his doubts muted. The fog gave him a strange courage, a shield against the weight of the night. On the rare clear night, the watchman could see the stars, faint pinpricks far above the smoke and haze. But such nights were few. Most of the time, the fog ruled the city, a thick white blanket that smothered all but the closest flames of light. He learned to move slowly, to listen more than to look, to rely on touch as much as sight. Every step was careful, every turn deliberate. The fog demanded respect, patience, and quiet vigilance. At times, he paused in the middle of a street, letting the lantern's glow wash over a wall or doorway, trying to pierce the mist with light. He would wait, listening for any sound of footfall, a whisper, a sigh. Sometimes there was nothing but the muffled world. Other times, distant voices would drift through, indistinct and fleeting, like echoes from a dream. The fog was a mask, but also a mirror. It reflected the watchman's solitude and resilience. To move through it was to embrace the city's pulse, to become part of its eternal night. When the watchman finished his rounds, the fog often began to lift. The first gray light of dawn would break through the whiteness, scattering it into thin wisps. The city would reappear, edges sharp again, sounds clear and bright. But until then, the fog was his companion, the quiet, hiding fog that concealed all. The lantern's flame was a fragile thing, a flickering star struggling against an ocean of darkness. Held in the watchman's steady hand, it cast a small pool of pale yellow light that stretched only a few feet ahead, leaving the rest of the street shrouded in shadow and fog. Within this narrow circle, the world was sharp, clear, and real. Beyond it, the city dissolved into uncertainty, a shifting tapestry of shapes and half-forms. The glow was never steady. It danced and wavered with every step, a living thing that breathed with the watchman's movement. The glass of the lantern, thick and smoky from years of use, fractured the light into soft halos and shards. Sometimes the flame flickered violently, thrown into wild patterns by the slightest gust of wind or the sudden draft that snaked through a narrow alley. This play of light and shadow was both companion and trickster. The watchman's eyes, adjusted to the dark, strained to catch details beyond the lantern's fragile halo. Shapes emerged and receded, as if the night itself was alive and watching. On many nights, The fog turned the familiar into the uncanny. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, warped by the wavering light. A stack of crates might become a crouching figure, hunched and waiting. A hanging line of laundry, caught in the breeze, could resemble a row of ghostly bodies swaying in silent vigil. One night, as the watchman moved down a narrow street lined with old brick buildings, his lantern light caught on something at the corner of his eye. A figure stood motionless, cloaked in shadow, just beyond the edge of the lantern's glow. The watchman paused, heart quickening. The figure seemed to turn slowly, just as he raised his cudgel. But when he stepped closer, the shape resolved into a line of sheets hanging on a clothesline, flapping gently in the breeze. The watchman exhaled quietly, the tension draining away. It was a familiar trick of the night, the mind filling empty spaces with shapes it knew or feared. Sounds, too, were deceptive. Footsteps sometimes echoed faintly down empty streets, soft and measured. But when the watchman turned, no one was there. The mist swallowed the echoes, scattering them like smoke. At times, he heard distant voices, snatches of conversation or laughter that vanished when he strained to listen. The lantern's glow caught on these illusions, weaving them into the night's tapestry. A stray cat slinking between barrels could cast a shadow that seemed to follow him, a silent watcher in the gloom. A fluttering newspaper caught in the wind might look like a fluttering cloak. The watchman learned to trust neither sight nor sound entirely. The night was a place of half-truths and shifting illusions. To survive it, he had to be patient, cautious, and steady. There were moments when the lantern's light revealed more than just tricks. The glow fell on a cracked window, catching the gleam of a sleeping child's face behind the glass. It lit a worn wooden sign hanging from a tavern, swinging slowly on rusty chains. It painted the wet stones with amber color, turning the street into a river of fire. But just as often, the light betrayed him. Once, the watchman thought he saw a figure standing in the fog ahead. The shape was tall, wrapped in a cloak that seemed to flow into the mist itself. His heart pounded. As he stepped closer, the figure faded away, melting into the fog like a dream dissolving at dawn. At another time, the lantern caught the eyes of a dog sitting by a doorway. The animal stared quietly, unblinking, its gaze glowing in the yellow light. The watchman tipped his hat in silent greeting and moved on. The dog did not follow. The lantern was a guide, but also a reminder of the night's mystery. Its flickering light could comfort or confuse. It showed the way, but also highlighted the unknown. In the stillness between calls of the hour, the watchman's breath and footsteps were the only other sounds. Yet even these were sometimes betrayed by the fog's trickery. A rustle of leaves might sound like a whisper. A distant cry might be the wind's lament. The shadows around him shifted constantly, turning the city into a place where reality and imagination danced together. The watchman's shadow stretched tall and thin, wavering like a specter on the walls. Occasionally, a second shadow seemed to fall beside his own and echo from the fog. Despite these eerie moments, the watchman remained resolute. The lantern's glow was his beacon, his shield. Through flickers of light and moving shadows, he walked his rounds, part of the night's endless story. The London night was not silent. Beneath the thick cloak of darkness and the heavy fog, the city spoke in a language all its own, a chorus of strange shifting sounds that drifted through the narrow streets, whispered from alleyways, and echoed off ancient stone walls. For the watchman, these sounds were the pulse of the night, a map to its secrets and its dangers. There was the steady, familiar rhythm of horses' hooves on wet cobblestones. The clop, 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 steady and measured, echoed softly in the fog, the sound bouncing between buildings like distant drums. These horses belonged to late-night carriages or the occasional constable making his rounds. The watchman learned to recognize the weight behind each step, the difference between the heavy hooves of a carriage and the lighter trot of a mounted rider. The sound was a comfort, a sign that the city was alive and moving, even when the streets seemed empty. Then there were the cries of creatures who made the night their home. Owls hooted mournfully from the dark eaves of churches and old buildings, their voices carrying across empty squares. Their calls were sharp and sudden, a reminder of the wildness that lingered just beyond the city's edge. The watchman often paused to listen, the hoots breaking the silence like a distant bell tolling some forgotten time. Occasionally, the faint wail of a baby crying drifted from a lit window behind glass. The sound was thin and fragile, a piercing thread in the night's fabric. It reminded the watchman of families tucked safely away, the fragile hope of new life amidst the city's harshness. Yet, even such a sound could be a warning distress that might call for intervention, or the signal of unrest within a home. There were harsher noises, too, an unexpected clang of metal, echoing from a blacksmith's forge, still active in the dead hours, or the sudden slam of a shutter caught by a gust of wind. These sharp sounds startled the watchman, pulling his senses taut. Sometimes the clatter was harmless, a door slamming, a cart overturning in a back alley, but sometimes it was a call to danger. In the darkness, sounds took on new meaning. A rustle in a pile of rubbish might be rats, or it might be a thief rifling through refuse. The watchman learned to listen closely for the difference. The quick, sharp scurry of rodents, or the slow, deliberate shuffle of a human. The night was full of such mysteries, and sound was his guide. Footsteps were especially telling. The faint tap of a distant walker, measured and calm, was nothing to fear. But hurried steps pounding, uneven, might signal a chase, a flight from trouble. The watchman's trained ear could discern the weight behind each footfall, the direction from which it came, and even the mood of the person making it. The wind itself was a player in this nocturnal symphony. It whispered through empty streets, bending loose papers and rattling shutters. At times, it carried strange echoes, snatches of song, laughter, or crying that seemed out of place, as if the city were dreaming aloud. The watchman never fully trusted these fleeting sounds. They were the fog's own tricks, illusions woven into the night. Sometimes the watchman heard voices arguing, sharp and low, from behind closed doors. These muffled quarrels were warnings, tensions, simmering beneath the surface of the sleeping city. They reminded him that the streets were not only paths of peace, but also battlegrounds of human struggle. Amidst all this, the watchman developed an instinct, a subtle understanding of what was safe and what was not. Years of walking the same paths, listening to the same chorus, had honed his senses. He learned to tell a playful shout from a shout of alarm, a passing carriage from a band of thieves on the move. Sometimes his ears caught the distant sound of church bells marking the hour, or the harsh clang of a factory whistle signaling a shift change. These sounds gave structure to the night, marking the passing hours and reminding the watchman of time's steady march. Even the silence had a voice, a sudden drop in sound. No footsteps, no distant voices could signal danger. The watchman would pause, lantern held high, eyes searching the fog for any movement. The night was a delicate balance of noise and quiet, each carrying its own weight. In moments of uncertainty, the watchman's cudgel was never far from his hand. He learned to trust his ears, but he also knew that sound could deceive. A sudden noise might be a warning or a trap. Through the long hours, the strange sounds of London's night shaped the watchman's world. A world where every noise told a story, and every silence held a secret. It was a world he knew well, and one he guarded faithfully, step by step, sound by sound. The night in London was a quiet world, thick with fog and shadow, where the watchman moved like a solitary spirit, a steady presence in a restless city. Most hours passed in silence, broken only by the low call of the hour or the soft tap of cudgel on door frames. But sometimes, in the thick veil of mist, strangers emerged, figures as fleeting and fragile as the fog itself. These encounters were rare but unforgettable, brief interludes of human connection that lingered long after footsteps faded. One such night, as the watchman rounded a bend where the gas lamps flickered uncertainly, he noticed a figure staggering near the edge of the street. The lantern's glow caught the man's unsteady form, a gentleman clearly far beyond sober. Wrapped in a threadbare coat, it flapped loosely in the chill air. "Steady there, sir," the watchman called softly, his voice low but firm. "These stones are slick with rain, and the fog's thick enough to swallow a man whole." The gentleman turned, blinking as if waking from a dream. "Aye," he muttered, breath smelling faintly of ale and pipe tobacco. "Lost my way, I have. Can't find my lodgings in this blasted mist." The watchman's eyes softened, though he kept his cudgel close at hand. No shame in that. Best to find shelter before the fog deepens. "I can see you safely to your door, if you like." The man offered a lopsided smile, eyes glassy yet grateful. "You're a guardian, aren't you? Watching over the city when most have fled to their beds." "Aye," the watchman replied quietly. "A sentinel of sorts." They walked slowly together through the haze, the man leaning on the watchman's arm as his steps grew more certain. Occasionally, the watchman spoke of the city's rhythms, the tolling of distant bells, a predictable pattern of night's creatures stirring in shadow. The gentleman listened in silence, the fog muffling his breaths and the clop of their footsteps. At last, a faint glow appeared through the mist, the warm light of a single window, the flicker of a candle flame inside a modest home. The man paused, reaching out with trembling hands. "Thank you, friend. You've saved me from vanishing into the white sea." The watchman nodded, lantern held high, watching as the man disappeared inside and the door creaked closed behind him. The encounter was brief, but it stayed with the watchman, a reminder that beneath the city's cold and fog lay fragile human lives, vulnerable and uncertain. On another night, the watchman's rounds brought him to a narrow alley where a shadow darted between barrels and refuse. The fog curled thick around the walls, swallowing sound and light. The watchman's lantern illuminated a pale, frightened face, youthful and dirty, hands clutching a handful of stolen goods. "Hold now," the watchman said firmly, stepping forward with a cautious but steady gait. "This path leads only to ruin." The boy's eyes darted nervously, lips trembling. "I had no choice. My family's starving. There's nothing left for us." The watchman's voice softened. "There are better ways than this, lad. Come with me, and I'll see you safely to the constable. No harm done, if you're honest." For a moment, the boy hesitated, fear and hope battling in his gaze. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Thank you, sir." Together, they moved through the fog, two figures, bound by necessity and mercy. The watchman's presence was a shield, not just against the night, but against a harsher judgment the boy might face come morning. He understood that the city's shadows concealed many such stories, stories of desperation and small, quiet courage. Not all encounters were born of hardship. Sometimes, the night brought moments of tender urgency. One evening, the watchman's lantern light caught a small hand slipping free from a nursemaid's grasp. He heard the soft patter of hurried footsteps, light and urgent. "Come back, love," a gentle voice pleaded, breathless and coaxing. "The night is no place for you." The child's laughter was a bright, ringing sound, clear and defiant in the fog. "I'm not afraid." The watchman's voice cut through the mist, calm and steady. "Better safe than sorry, young one. These streets have eyes that don't always watch kindly." The nursemaid caught up, grasping the child's hand with a sigh of relief. "Thank you, sir. You have a kind heart to watch over us all." The watchman only nodded, his lantern swinging softly. These fleeting moments were the city's pulse, proof that beneath the cold stone and fog, life persisted bright and fragile as a candle flame. Other nights, strangers came in less defined forms. A solitary figure cloaked in shadow, slipping silently through the mist. An old woman muttering prayers as she shuffled past. A pair of lovers huddled beneath an awning, sharing whispered words and stolen warmth. The watchman observed them all with a careful eye, ever watchful but never intrusive. He was the city's guardian, not its judge. In the fog's embrace, every meeting felt like a secret. Conversations were hushed, voices barely rising above the whispering wind. The watchman spoke softly, his words carrying a gentle authority that did not startle but steadied. One particularly cold night, he came upon a man sitting slumped against a doorway, shivering in threadbare clothes. The man's eyes were hollow, his breath shallow. "You're far from warmth," the watchman said quietly, kneeling beside him. "There's a shelter a few blocks from here. Come with me." The man nodded faintly, grateful for the offer, and together they moved through the fog, a silent procession through the city's hidden corners. These encounters left impressions, etched into the watchman's memory like faint chalk marks on old walls. Each one was a story of need or kindness, fear or hope. They were threads woven into the fabric of the night, fragile connections in a world otherwise ruled by shadow. At times, the watchman wondered what stories these strangers carried with them, where they had come from, what had brought them to this mist-shrouded city, and what awaited them when dawn finally broke. But the fog was a keeper of secrets, and it swallowed many such questions whole. The watchman's role was to witness, to protect, to guide. His lantern's light was a beacon, his voice a steady thread through the night's unraveling. And in those rare encounters, those whispered conversations, beneath the heavy mist, he found the city's true heart beating steady and strong. As he continued his rounds, the watchman carried these memories like talismans reminders that even in the darkest hours, the city was alive with stories, with lives intertwined beneath the fog. The city slept, but the watchman did not. Beneath the thick fog and the muted glow of his lantern, he walked through streets emptied of life, carrying with him the weight of countless thoughts. The night was long, and in those long hours between the calls of the hour when the city's noises fell away to a soft hush, his mind drifted inward, turning over memories, worries, and quiet reflections that no one else would ever hear. The watchman's footsteps echoed softly on the cobblestones, a solitary rhythm in the vastness of the night. The fog wrapped around him like a second skin, muffling the sounds of the sleeping city, and the lantern's small pool of light marked the only certainty in a world blurred by shadow. It was in these hours, when the watchman's eyes scanned dark doorways and his ears strained for the faintest hint of disturbance, that his mind often wandered far from the streets he guarded. He thought first of youth his own long vanished, the boy who once raced through sunlit fields, whose hands had never known the chill of night fog or the weight of a cudgel. Those days seemed distant, like a dream half remembered. He recalled his childhood home, a small cottage nestled by the river, where the scent of fresh bread and wood smoke mingled in the air. The laughter of siblings, the warmth of a mother's embrace. These were ghosts now, shadows more elusive than the mists that cloaked London. How different his life might have been if he had stayed there, beneath open skies and summer sun. But fate had pulled him to the city's heart, where the night was cold and the fog never lifted. His hands had learned to carry burdens, not just the physical weight of his tools, but the invisible load of responsibility. To walk the night was to be a guardian, yes, but also a witness to the city's darkest corners. The watchman's thoughts drifted to family, those left behind or lost to time. Faces blurred by years, voices faded like distant bells. Did they think of him when they lay in their beds, warm and safe? Did they know the dangers he faced, the loneliness that stretched endlessly between the street lamps? His health was a constant concern. The damp air gnawed at his lungs, and the fog seemed to seep into his bones, chilling him from within. The weight of the cloak, the ache in tired muscles, the persistent cough that sometimes rattled deep in his chest. These were reminders that he was mortal, that the night was no friend to the body. Yet still he walked, driven by duty and a stubborn will. The watchman often marveled at the city's sleeping silence. It was a silence unlike any other, a vast, almost sacred quiet that wrapped around every building and alley. To be the only soul awake in this vast city was a strange and solitary thing. The world felt paused, held breathless in the fog's embrace. Time itself seemed to slow, stretching the night into something almost eternal. He thought about the lives unfolding behind closed doors, the families gathered around hearths, the lovers whispered promises in dim rooms, the lonely souls wrestling with their own fears and hopes. He was a shadow passing by their windows, unseen but ever present, a silent protector. Sometimes the watchman felt the weight of his isolation keenly. The loneliness was a cold companion, pressing in as the fog thickened. He was a man apart neither fully of the day nor the night. The city's living heart pulsed while he wandered its quiet veins, a solitary figure marked by lantern light. Yet in that solitude, there was also a strange kind of peace. The watchman's thoughts could roam freely, unburdened by the clamor of the waking world. He found comfort in the rhythm of his rounds, the steady cadence of footsteps and calls marking the hours. It was a meditation, a vigil not just for the city, but for himself. He pondered the stories the city held, the lives that had passed through these streets, the secrets whispered in the fog, the hopes and tragedies woven into the stone and mortar. The watchman felt a deep connection to this history, a sense of belonging to something larger than himself. Though unseen and often forgotten, he was part of the city's endless story. In these quiet moments, memories returned with vivid clarity. The laughter of a childhood friend long lost, the warm hand of a mother now cold in the earth, the sharp sting of youthful mistakes, and the hard lessons learned in the years since. These recollections were both comfort and ache, threads woven through the fabric of the night. Sometimes his thoughts turned to the future uncertain and fragile. Would there be more nights like this? Would the fog always hide his path? Would his body hold out long enough to see another dawn? The questions weighed heavily, but the watchman answered them not with despair, but with resolve. He was a guardian of the night, a keeper of its secrets. His path was solitary, but it was necessary. The city depended on him, even if it never knew. And so he walked on through fog and shadow, through silence and mystery, with steady hands and a watchful heart. The lantern's light flickered softly as the watchman moved forward, casting long shadows that danced and faded with each step. The night was deep, but so was his resolve. In the quiet, he found strength. In the darkness, he found purpose. And as the first pale light of dawn began to filter through the mist, the watchman felt a quiet satisfaction. Another night survived, another vigil kept. The city would soon awaken, unaware of the silent guardian who had walked its streets until the fog lifted and the world was once again bathed in light. The watchman's path often led him far from the gaslit squares and broad avenues, deep into the labyrinth of East London's poorest quarters. Here, the streets narrowed into tight, twisting alleys that seemed to fold in on themselves, where light was swallowed whole by crumbling brick and soot-darkened walls. The air hung thick with the heavy scent of smoke, damp stone, and the lingering bitterness of coal fires barely fed. These were the silent streets of the poor. The watchman moved slowly, his boots soft on uneven cobblestones worn slick by countless feet and years of rain. The fog clung tighter here, weaving through broken windows and sagging roofs, blurring the jagged edges of dilapidated tenements stacked like weary giants against the sky. The buildings leaned close, their cracked walls stained black with soot and neglect, each one a silent witness to hardship. Behind the boarded windows and shuttered doors, life struggled on. The watchman could feel it in the thick stillness, the weight of hunger pressing down, the cold seeping through thin walls, the weary breaths of families crowded into spaces too small for hope. He paused often, listening. Every cough that rasped from a cracked chimney or a damp doorway carried meaning illness, fatigue, the slow toll of hardship on fragile bodies. Each creak of floorboards or groan of timber told a story of worn-out homes fighting to hold together against the relentless London winter. The watchman's lantern cast a dim circle of light, revealing peeling paint and broken glass, rickety fences and rusted gates tangled with ivy and grime. A stray cat darted between barrels, disappearing like a shadow swallowed by the night. Rats scurried unseen, their soft patter a constant companion to these silent streets. Here, the city's roar was a distant memory, replaced by a heavy quiet broken only by muffled noises, the stifled cry of a child, the whispered prayers of a mother, the dull thud of a boot on loose stone. Though powerless to change much, the watchman carried these sounds with him like fragile secrets. He knew each house, each family's rhythm. The cough from Mrs. Harrington's front room told of her worsening chest. The soft sobbing behind number 14's door was a child's loneliness. The creak from the top floor of the old warehouse marked the slow decay of once was a bustling trade hub. His footsteps slowed as he approached a doorway barely hanging on rusted hinges. A faint glow came from inside, a candle burning low, its light flickering against threadbare curtains. He heard the whisper of voices, an old man and a boy speaking in hushed tones. "Hold on, lad. The dawn will come soon. Will it be better then?" The boy asked, his voice fragile. The watchman's heart clenched. He could only hope. He moved on, leaving the whispered hopes behind, swallowed again by the fog. In these alleys, he was more than a guardian, he was a witness. The silence here was heavy with stories untold, lives overlooked by the city's bustling heart. Yet in this quiet darkness, the watchman carried a steady light small, flickering but unyielding. He called the hour softly, a voice steady and calm, a reminder that even here, in the deepest shadows, someone walked, someone watched, someone remembered. And though the night was long and the streets were silent, the watchman kept walking step by careful step through the heart of a city that never truly slept. The watchman's lantern cast a soft glow on the damp streets, its flickering light a lone beacon in the fog-heavy night. As he moved through the city's winding lanes, his eyes often caught the faintest shimmer of life behind windows, small panes of glass that held brief, fragile glimpses into worlds otherwise hidden by shadow and brick. These glimpses were fleeting but profound. They offered a window not only into the lives of others, but into the quiet humanity that thrived beneath the city's cold exterior lives, marked not by grand events or loud declarations, but by simple, tender moments woven into the fabric of night. At a small bakery nestled between two shuttered shops, the watchman paused outside a frosted window. Inside, the baker worked by a dim oil lamp, his hands moving rhythmically as he kneaded dough on a worn wooden table. The warm amber light painted the walls in soft gold, highlighting flour dust swirling in the air like tiny ghosts. The baker's face was etched with lines of weariness, but his movements were steady, practiced. He hummed a low tune, almost inaudible beneath the watchman's careful breathing. The aroma of yeast and baking bread seemed to reach through the glass, mingling with the night's damp chill. In this quiet corner, the city's pulse slowed, held in the patient hands of a man crafting sustenance for the coming day. The watchman watched for a moment longer, the scene a balm against the cold, then moved on, his footsteps soft on the cobblestones. Further along, a faint glow flickered behind the lace curtains of a modest row house. Through the window, the watchman saw a mother rocking her baby gently in a creaking wooden chair. The room was sparse but warm, lit only by the fire's dying embers and a small candle flickering on a mantelpiece. The mother's eyes were tender, filled with exhaustion and fierce love. She hummed a lullaby, her voice a soft thread weaving through the night air. The infant nestled close, tiny fingers clutching the warm fabric of her shawl. This was a world away from the fogged streets outside, safe, intimate, wrapped in the fragile cocoon of care. The watchman's heart softened as he stood still, a silent guardian of this tender moment before he continued his rounds. On grander streets, where gas lamps burned brighter, he glimpsed other lives, drawing rooms where families gathered by firelight, the flicker of flame casting shadows on walls, lined with portraits and bookshelves. A fire slowly died down in one such room, embers glowing softly like captured stars, ready to fade into night. The watchman imagined conversations paused, stories shared over tea, laughter muffled by thick curtains. These homes were worlds apart from the cold alleys, yet connected by the same fragile thread of humanity, the desire for warmth, safety, and belonging. Sometimes he caught sight of solitary figures, a man reading by lamplight, a woman stitching by candle, a child scribbling by the faint glow of a lantern. Each was a story unfolding quietly, unseen by most, but witnessed by the watchman's steady gaze. These glimpses were both comfort and reminder. They spoke of lives that continued despite hardship, moments of peace carved out in the midst of the city's relentless pace. The watchman carried these images with him, like precious tokens, proof that behind every window, behind every door, the city breathed with hope and resilience. And so he walked on, through fog and shadow, his lantern light a silent thread weaving together the small, quiet lives seen through flickering panes of glass. The watchman's lantern cast a soft glow on the damp streets, its flickering light a lone beacon in the fog-heavy night. As he moved through the city's winding lanes, his eyes often caught the faintest shimmer of life behind windows' small panes of glass that held brief, fragile glimpses into worlds otherwise hidden by shadow and brick. These glimpses were fleeting but profound. They offered a window not only into the lives of others, but into the quiet humanity that thrived beneath the city's cold exterior lives, marked not by grand events or loud declarations, but by simple, tender moments woven into the fabric of night. At a small bakery nestled between two shuttered shops, the watchman paused outside a frosted window. Inside, the baker worked by a dim oil lamp, his hands moving rhythmically as he kneaded dough on a worn wooden table. The warm amber light painted the walls in soft gold, highlighting flour dust swirling in the air like tiny ghosts. The baker's face was etched with lines of weariness, but his movements were steady, practiced. He hummed a low tune, almost inaudible beneath the watchman's careful breathing. The aroma of yeast and baking bread seemed to reach through the glass, mingling with the night's damp chill. In this quiet corner, the city's pulse slowed, held in the patient hands of a man crafting sustenance for the coming day. The watchman watched for a moment longer, the scene a balm against the cold, then moved on, his footsteps soft on the cobblestones. Further along, a faint glow flickered behind the lace curtains of a modest row house. Through the window, the watchman saw a mother rocking her baby gently in a creaking wooden chair. The room was sparse but warm, lit only by the fire's dying embers and a small candle flickering on a mantelpiece. The mother's eyes were tender, filled with exhaustion and fierce love. She hummed a lullaby, her voice a soft thread weaving through the night air. The infant nestled close, tiny fingers clutching the warm fabric of her shawl. This was a world away from the fogged streets outside, safe, intimate, wrapped in the fragile cocoon of care. The watchman's heart softened as he stood still, a silent guardian of this tender moment before he continued his rounds. On grander streets, where gas lamps burned brighter, he glimpsed other lives, drawing rooms where families gathered by firelight, the flicker of flame casting shadows on walls lined with portraits and bookshelves. A fire slowly died down in one such room, embers glowing softly like captured stars, ready to fade into night. The watchman imagined conversations paused, stories shared over tea, laughter muffled by thick curtains. These homes were worlds apart from the cold alleys, yet connected by the same fragile thread of humanity, the desire for warmth, safety, and belonging. Sometimes he caught sight of solitary figures, a man reading by lamplight, a woman stitching by candle, a child scribbling by the faint glow of a lantern. Each was a story unfolding quietly, unseen by most, but witnessed by the watchman's steady gaze. These glimpses were both comfort and reminder. They spoke of lives that continued despite hardship, moments of peace carved out in the midst of the city's relentless pace. The watchman carried these images with him, like precious tokens, proof that behind every window, behind every door, the city breathed with hope and resilience. And so he walked on, through fog and shadow, his lantern light a silent thread, weaving together the small, quiet lives seen through flickering panes of glass. The fog had thickened into a near-solid wall by the time the watchman reached the narrow alley behind the rows of shuttered shops. The gas lamps lining the street beyond flickered faintly through the mist, their weak glow swallowed almost entirely by the damp air. Here, in the shadowed heart of the city, the silence was heavier, more charged. The watchman's lantern cut a small circle of pale light, swinging gently at his side as he moved with practiced quiet. His boots made soft contact with the wet cobblestones, but even that small noise seemed loud in the stillness. The city held its breath, and a sudden sharp sound, a faint scrape, barely audible, but enough to stop the watchman in his tracks. He paused, listening. There it was again, a soft shuffle against the wooden crates stacked high against a wall. The sound of movement, careful and deliberate, not the aimless wanderings of the night. The watchman's hand went instinctively to the cudgel at his belt, but he did not draw it. Not yet. Tonight, words would be his first weapon. "Hold now," he called out softly but firmly, voice low and steady. "There's no need for trouble in this quiet hour." A figure stirred in the fog ahead, shadowy and hesitant. The watchman's lantern light fell upon a young man crouched beside the crates, hands furtively reaching into a battered sack. The thief froze, eyes wide in sudden realization. "Easy now," the watchman said, stepping forward slowly, careful to keep his tone calm and even. "I'm no enemy, just a man walking his rounds." The thief's shoulders hunched, breath ragged in the cold air. "Please, sir, I didn't mean no harm, just trying to feed my family." The watchman studied the boy's face, pale, gaunt, haunted by hunger and fear. The city had bred many like him, desperation etched deep in their eyes. "Stealing's a hard road," the watchman replied quietly. "But there are better ways. Come with me. I'll see you safely to the constable. No harm done, if you're willing." The boy hesitated, torn between fear and hope. Then, with a shuddering breath, he nodded. Together, they moved from the alley into the thicker fog, the watchman's lantern leading the way like a small beacon in a sea of shadows. The thief's steps were slow, uncertain, but guided by the watchman's steady presence. As they walked, the watchman spoke gently. "The city's full of hard nights and harder choices. But even in the darkest times, there's always a chance to find a better path." The boy's eyes flickered with something like gratitude, but the weight of his troubles remained. When they reached the constable's station, the watchman spoke on the boy's behalf, urging mercy and understanding. The thief's punishment would be like a chance, the watchman hoped, for a fresh start. Later, as the watchman resumed his rounds, the fog had lifted slightly, the night less oppressive. Yet the memory of that quiet confrontation lingered, a reminder that sometimes strength came not from force, but from calm words and steady hands. Not all dangers were so simple. On another night, the watchman's ears caught the harsh murmur of voices arguing behind a thin wooden door. He approached slowly, lantern raised high, the soft light casting long shadows on the worn brick. The voices grew louder, a man's angry growl, a woman's trembling reply. The watchman's heart tightened. Domestic disputes were the city's hidden wounds, fought in silence and shadows. He knocked firmly on the door. "Peace in the night, friends. I'm here to help." The voices stopped abruptly. The door creaked open just enough for the watchman to glimpse a face flushed with tears and fear. "Please," the woman whispered. He's not himself tonight." The watchman stepped inside the small, cramped room. A man sat slumped in a chair, head bowed, hands clenched tightly. The tension was thick, almost suffocating. The watchman spoke softly. "I'm no judge, just a man who walks the streets when others sleep. Tell me what troubles you." The man's voice cracked, heavy with pain. "I'm lost, sir. The debts, the work, the hunger, it's too much." The watchman nodded, understanding more than words could say. "The city is harsh, but violence is no answer. Let me stay a while, help you find calm before the dawn." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then, slowly, the man's shoulders relaxed, the anger fading into exhaustion. The watchman stayed until the first light of morning, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm. These encounters, rare, tense, fragile, were the true test of the watchman's role. Not just protector of streets and doors, but keeper of peace in a city that so often teetered on the edge. He carried no sword, bore no badge of power. His strength was patience, his courage quiet resolve. And when danger came, as it so often did, the watchman met it not with fury, but with calm words, steady hands, and a heart willing to listen. The night may have been full of shadows, but the watchman's lantern burned steady, a promise that even in the darkest hours, there was a light to follow, a light of mercy and hope and quiet strength. The city slept beneath a blanket of fog, the streets wrapped in silence and shadow. Yet above the quiet, a steady rhythm pulsed through the night, the deep, sonorous tolling of the church bells from the old clock tower, calling out the passing hours with a voice both ancient and resolute. For the watchman, the bell was more than mere timekeeper. It was a constant companion, a thread weaving through the long hours of his vigil. Each chime cut through the dense fog like a solemn hymn, its echoes rolling over rooftops and alleys, brushing past chimneys and winding staircases, reaching even the darkest corners where his lantern's light could not touch. He listened for it as he moved, feet tapping softly on cobblestones, cloak heavy with damp and dust. The bell's toll was a marker, a guidepost in the endless night. It reminded him that time was passing, that his watch was being kept, that the city's heartbeat still thudded steady beneath the hush of fog. The first chime, deep and full, would come just after the hour, a slow, deliberate note that hung in the cold air, long and reverberant. It rolled out like a summons, calling the watchman to vigilance. With the bell's first toll, he felt a surge of purpose, a renewed sense that his presence mattered, that he was part of the city's enduring rhythm. Each subsequent bell followed, ringing out in measured succession. 2, 3, sometimes more, their tones layering atop one another like a chorus sung by stone and air. The sound traveled far, bending around corners, threading through narrow lanes and open squares alike. The watchman's ears trained to the bells were keen. He knew the subtle differences, the slight delay between the striking of the hammer and the full sound ringing out, the faint, metallic overtones that shimmered in the cold, the way the notes seemed to stretch and waver in the fog, growing softer then louder again. Sometimes he would stop walking, lantern held steady, to simply listen. The bell's voice filled the silence, a solemn song that carried meaning beyond mere hours. It spoke of time's passage, of moments lost and gained, of a city waking and sleeping, breathing in cycles as old as the stones beneath his boots. The bell reminded him of his own place in that cycle, a solitary figure moving through the night, keeping watch as the hours slipped by. The tolling marked the progress of his shift. How many hours left before dawn's first light? How many more steps through fog and shadow? The watchman recalled stories told in his youth of the clock tower's bells, how they once guided travelers home, warned of danger, celebrated joy. In those tales, the bell was a voice of the city's soul, a guardian as true as any man. In the fog, that voice became even more vital. When sight was limited to the glow of his lantern, and shapes blurred into ghostly forms, the bell's clear call cut through the uncertainty. It was a reassurance that order endured amid chaos, that time kept moving even when the night seemed endless. On some nights, the watchman imagined the bell as a companion, an unseen presence that walked beside him, echoing his own steady steps. The sound intertwined with his breathing, his heartbeat, the soft tap of cudgel on door frames. The bell also carried warnings. Its toll might mark the passing of midnight, the witching hour when danger lurked closest. It was a call to sharpen senses, to move with care, to listen harder for the faintest sound beyond the fog. Sometimes, the watchman's thoughts drifted as he listened. He pondered the lives sleeping beneath those chiming rooftops, the families dreaming, the lonely souls seeking peace, the laborers yet to rise. The bell was their shared timekeeper, a common thread binding all who dwelled within the city's reach. In those moments, the watchman felt less alone. Though the streets might be empty and silent, the bell's voice reminded him he was part of a larger whole. The city was alive, its spirit ringing through the night. And so, with each toll, the watchman continued his vigil, footsteps falling soft, lantern light flickering steady, heart attuned to the clock tower's song. The night would pass. The bell would ring on. The night had stretched long and heavy, a cloak of fog and shadow wrapped tightly around the city's bones. But now, as the watchman moved through the final hours of his vigil, the first faint whispers of dawn began to stir, a delicate unraveling of the night's dark tapestry, soft and slow like a breath, held and then gently released. At first, the change was almost imperceptible. The fog, which had been a thick, smothering presence since twilight, began to thin ever so slightly. Where once it hung like a solid wall, dense and white as fresh snow, it now curled and stretched into delicate wisps, drifting upwards and away, as though the city itself was sighing in relief. The watchman noticed it in the way the air grew lighter, less damp against his skin. The cold still clung to the stones beneath his boots, but it had lost the sharp bite of midnight, softened by the coming light. The cloak around his shoulders, heavy with night's weight, seemed to breathe with him, loosening its hold. Above the rooftops, the sky shifted in tone. The black velvet of night gave way to a deep indigo, then slowly bled into a pale, uncertain blue. A ripple of faint light appeared just beyond the jagged silhouettes of chimney pots and weathered rooftops, hinting at the sun's slow rise far beyond the city's edge. The watchman paused, his lantern's flame flickering low in the quiet dawn. The oil had burned down through countless hours, and the light it gave now was weak, no longer a sharp beacon to pierce the fog, but a small flickering glow that cast long, trembling shadows. His hands were sore from holding the weight of his tools, muscles stiff and aching, but still he carried on. Around him, the city began to shift. The silence of night softened, pierced gently by a new chorus, the first tentative notes of birdsong. Somewhere nearby, a robin called out, a clear, bright trill that seemed almost impossible after hours of stillness. Then another and another, their melodies weaving together in a fragile dawn symphony. The watchman listened, heart steady but touched by a quiet joy. The birds' songs were a promise, a herald of life returning to the sleeping streets. He moved forward, lantern swaying with each slow step. The cobblestones were slick with dew, glistening faintly in the nascent light. Puddles reflected the pale sky, fractured like broken glass. Damp leaves, gathered in corners and gutters, stirred softly as a breeze began to pick up. Windows along the streets showed the faintest hints of life, Curtains twitched, shutters creaked open, and behind glass, the warm glow of candlelight began to glow brighter, a soft counterpoint to the fading night. The watchman's thoughts wandered to those waking moments, the quiet stirrings within homes where families rose to face a new day. He imagined the baker kneading dough for morning's bread, the mother preparing a meal, children stretching and yawning as they left behind the dreams of night. Though his shift was far from over, a sense of closure settled over him. The hours of darkness that had seemed endless now felt finite, marked by the slow, steady march of dawn. He reached a familiar corner where the shadows clung longest. Here, the fog lingered still, a silver haze curling around wrought iron gates and ivy-clad walls. But even here, the light was creeping in, softening edges and revealing detail that had been lost tonight. The watchman's breath came in steady clouds, mingling with the cooling air. His face was drawn and tired, yet resolute. The city had called him to its night watch, and he had answered. A sudden cry broke the stillness, a child's laughter from a nearby alley, light and clear like a bell. The sound startled him, a reminder of life's persistence, even in the darkest hours. He smiled faintly beneath his cloak. The city was waking. His steps slowed as he approached the last of his rounds. Each door and window bore marks of his passing chalk symbols faintly etched, reminders to other watchmen or constables. Signs of safety, signs of watchfulness. He paused before a quiet tenement, its walls streaked with soot and age. The window above was open a crack, and through it drifted the scent of baking bread and fresh herbs. Somewhere beyond, a family stirred, the soft murmur of voices mingling with the gentle light. The watchman tipped his hat, a silent greeting to the unseen lives within. His lantern flickered once, twice, then dimmed, the flame growing small and fragile. He gave it a gentle shake, coaxing the light to dance again, though it would soon falter. The night's chill was retreating, replaced by a cool dawn breeze that brushed past his face and stirred the hem of his cloak. He pulled it tighter, savoring the last moments wrapped in its heavy warmth. Ahead, the sky brightened further. Pink and gold hues bled across the horizon, touching the city with the softest of fingers. Gas lamps began to wink out one by one, their flames extinguished as electric lights had yet to claim the night. The watchman's steps grew lighter, his pace slower, savoring the final moments of his solitary vigil. The city was changing. The night's mysteries faded with the darkness, replaced by the bustle of morning life, the clatter of carts on stone, the distant calls of market vendors, the murmur of early risers greeting the day. But for now, the watchman was alone with the dawn. He stopped at the corner where his shift would end, lantern finally dark in his hand. The fog had lifted almost entirely, the streets no longer ghosts, but waking places full of promise. He looked once more at the sky, the slow turning of night into day, a silent testament to endurance and hope. The watchman took a deep breath, the cool morning air filling his lungs. His body ached, but his duty was done. He turned toward home, each step lighter than the last, carrying with him the quiet satisfaction of a night kept. A city watched, and a world turning once again toward the light. The night watchman was once the city's silent guardian, a solitary figure cloaked in shadow, lantern in hand, moving tirelessly through fog and darkness to keep the sleeping streets safe. He was a man of endurance and quiet vigilance, a living presence in a world of gas lamps and cobblestones, of whispered secrets and midnight mysteries. But as the city grew and changed, so too did its need for protection. The night watchman slowly faded from the streets, replaced by the steady, uniformed ranks of professional police forces that marched in step through the turning pages of history. Their boots beat a different rhythm, their lanterns brighter, their authority louder and more formal. The age of the lone guardian walking with a cudgel and call gave way to the era of patrols, badges, and laws enforced by institutions. Yet though the watchman disappeared into history's folds, His legacy endures, woven into the fabric of city life, whispered in the idioms of language, and immortalized in stories and song. The phrase "keeping watch" remains, an echo of those who once walked the night, a reminder that even in modern times, some hold the line between safety and chaos when others sleep. The watchman's slow, deliberate rounds have become metaphor symbols of vigilance, care, and steadfastness. In literature, the night watchman stands as a figure both real and mythic. Poets and writers have painted him in strokes of shadow and light, sometimes a lonely sentinel, sometimes a guardian angel of the darkened city. His lantern is a beacon of hope, his footsteps a metronome, marking the passage of time and the persistence of watchfulness. The stories tell of a man who bore the weight of a city's safety on his shoulders, without recognition or fame. His duty was humble, often thankless. But the night was a place where courage wore no badge, and where the quiet presence of one could hold back the tide of disorder. As professional police forces took root in the 19th century, beginning with the formation of the Metropolitan Police in London in 1829, the role of the watchman began to change. Slowly and swiftly, patrolmen in blue uniforms replaced the figures cloaked in heavy wool, their cudgels exchanged for batons and revolvers, their calls replaced by whistles and telegraphs. The watchman's rounds were formalized, schedules tightened, and his role absorbed into a growing system of law and order. The fog still rolled in, the gas lamps still flickered, but the figure who had once walked alone became part of a broader network. For some, this was progress, a city moving towards safety through organization and modernity. For others, it was the loss of something intimate, something human. The solitary guardian who knew every alley, every door, every whispered danger gave way to an anonymous force. The night watchman's quiet footsteps were replaced by boots in formation and the hum of communication. Yet, even as the watchman disappeared, he was not forgotten. In the dim corners of pubs and alleys, old-timers spoke his name with reverence. In the verses of ballads sung beside flickering hearths, his lantern's glow still flickered. And in the slow turning of history, the night watchman remained a symbol, a reminder that before technology and order, there was a man who walked alone, bearing the city's safety as a sacred trust. His legacy lingers in the rituals of modern watchmen, the neighborhood patrols, the street wardens, the quiet eyes watching over sleeping communities. The essence of the night watchman lives on in those who, without fanfare, stand watch when others rest. For the city itself remembers. The worn boots that trod the foggy streets, the heavy cloak that shielded against cold, the steady call marking the hour, these images endure as echoes in time. Museums hold artifacts. History books tell their stories. But more than that, the spirit of the night watchman inhabits the collective memory, a figure both real and timeless. He is a reminder that vigilance need not roar to be powerful, that protection can come not from force, but from steady presence and quiet resolve. As dawn breaks on the modern world, the night watchman steps back into shadow, his lantern extinguished, but his light never truly gone. For as long as cities sleep and darkness falls, there will be those who walk the night watchers in the fog, keepers of peace, silent guardians whose footsteps tell stories beyond the reach of time. And so, the night watchman fades into history, not vanished, but transformed. A legend carried on the wind, whispered beneath the gas lamps, forever part of the city's soul.